noon. Weather pending, of course. We got a little bit of a break in the showers in the mid to late afternoon that hopefully will allow us to get all 9 innings in of that game coming up today. We did get all 9 innings in last night with South Carolina baseball taking on the Citadel out at Founders Park. And, looking back, it was obviously a tough weekend for the Gamecocks. Just losing in general is never fun, but losing to your rival is even less fun, especially the way that it happened, both those being one-run games, Saturday being that walk-off in the bottom of the 12th. So, you can't necessarily correct everything in your next game. You certainly want to see signs of improvement, but more than anything else, you just wanted to get back in the win category, to give yourself a little bit of confidence, going into obviously today's game, but the weekend as well, with the series coming up against Longwood. And then you're wrapping up the full non-conference slate with Georgia State before you jump into SEC play coming up next weekend against Ole Miss. And, as I talked about yesterday previewing this game, Citadel's a good team. Citadel was one of the higher scoring offenses in all of college baseball going into last night. So there was at least moderate concern that this game could get interesting, that they could maybe keep pace with what South Carolina was doing and, make this a little bit of a shootout. Fortunately, that didn't happen. South Carolina went out there and handled their business and picked up the 7-1 victory last night. We talk about, though, the leaving runners on base issue coming away from the weekend. I believe 22 runners left on base between the 22 games, 12 on Saturday and then 10 on Sunday. That's a problem, especially when you talk about games that ended up being decided by 1 run, where you say, okay, well, if we just get 2 more hits over the course of the weekend in the right situations, we're talking about South Carolina winning those games, maybe 6-5 or something like that. 6-4 maybe on Saturday. But that didn't obviously end up happening. And last night, once again, you end up leaving 13 runners on base. And what was particularly glaring, in 3 of the first 4 innings, you left the bases loaded by the time your at-bats were done. And that's something, again, that you certainly need to clean up, especially before you get into playing some SEC teams. Let's go with cut number 25 here, Dave. Here's Coach Kingston after the game talking about leaving runners on.
It's a work in progress for us. There's no question about that. We're not going to hide from it. But we had a big hitters meeting today with all the hitters, all the coaches, and we just talked about some things. And that's an area we know we need to improve on. And it's going to be a big part of what is our approach in all of our bats, not just an RBI at bats. And so I think it will carry over, but it's not going to happen overnight. We get on base a lot. Now we just need to make that next step and get over that hump of, okay, now we're getting those guys in pretty consistently.
And again, it is a work in progress, not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to be a slow process. You just hope that those numbers continue to trend downward a little bit as we go forward. Again, counting today, you have 5 more games before you go on the road to Ole Miss coming up next week, and you certainly hope to have at least alleviated some of that issue before you end up taking that road trip, because the run's going to be at a premium in the SEC. It's been great seeing South Carolina run roll opponents and do all that kind of stuff and, score 7, 8, 9 runs in a game. That's not going to be as easy to do in conference play. So you're going to, and at the end of conference games and series, when you look back and say, why did South Carolina lose? If you're counting 8, 9, 10 guys left on base, that is likely going to be the difference in those games that you lose if this problem does continue to persist. I talked about this yesterday. One thing that, after kind of digging through the numbers of the 11 games South Carolina had played after coming away from the weekend series against Clemson, something really stuck out to me with the way that South Carolina was hitting the ball, that they were not consistently making good contact, which, leads to things like line drives through those first 11 games. A lot of ground balls being hit by this team, and that's something similarly to the left on base issue that's not going to be corrected overnight, but I was encouraged by what I saw with the hitting performance last night. And Coach Kingston alluded to it a second ago with the hitters meeting that they had earlier in the day yesterday. Here he is expounding a little bit more, cut number 26 here, Dave, on improving the hitting with this team.
Approach, a lot of approach. I think we've gotten a little bit too full happy as of late, and a lot of that is how our hitters are preparing. You know, coaches were in the office all day yesterday talking about what can we do to help these guys, and you know, it was really a back to the basics approach that we met with the players today, and just let them know that, you know, what has always been our foundation, you know, especially since Monty got here last year, that really has been pushing it hard. We're just going to really make sure that we are continuing to prepare them with that foundation in mind, and that's using the whole field consistently.
So it is an issue that's being addressed, and the hitters are obviously aware of it. The hitting staff is obviously aware of it, and something that, again, you hope is going to continue to improve going forward. But I was encouraged by what I saw last night, because out of the 8 hits that South Carolina did get, 6 of them were on those line drive type of hits where you're making really good solid contact, dropped a lot of balls out there into shallow left field, and allowed runners to move and allowed runners to score, you know, when South Carolina could. So again, things trending at least maybe hopefully in the right direction a little bit in, you know, in terms of that. But overall, a win's a win at the end of the day, which is what you wanted to do. 9-3 on the season, good through 12 games. Coach Kingston, we'll get one more from him here. Cut number 27 here, Dave. This is his assessment of this team for what he's seen so far through the first 12 games.
It's both. It's both. You'd like to feel like by now you have the 9 guys that are probably your starters every day so that they can really settle in and get comfortable. But by the same token, they need to earn that, and you feel like they're giving you consistent quality bats. I think we're getting close. I don't know that we're all the way there yet, but we've got, 4 or 5 more games before SEC play starts, so we need to get there pretty soon.
And it does seem like South Carolina's settled in a little bit in terms of what their starting 9 is. Now, you obviously had Blake Jackson that started the season in that leadoff role out there in the outfield. It does seem like Kennedy Jones has kind of taken that on these past couple games a little bit more, and was certainly in the starting rotation once again last night. Now, some of that does have to do with matchups, and he ended up, you know, knocking in an RBI last night himself. So I'll be interested to see what Kingston ultimately decides to do once the Ole Miss series does roll around, whether he does go with Blake Jackson or Kennedy Jones at the you know, at the end of the day. Mixed up the lineup a little bit last night, too. Had Brewer batting in the leadoff spot, and Talmadge LeCroy hitting in the 2-hole before Petrie and Messina in the 3 and 4 spots. And shout out to Talmadge LeCroy. Went 3 or 4 last night and was just a home run short of hitting for the cycle. Had a triple sprinkled in there, which was really, really cool to see. Brewer 0 for 4 performance. You know, obviously he's been the most consistent hitter on the team this year, and I feel like I may have jinxed him a little bit, because I had to bring up the stat yesterday that he had not yet struck out this season. He did actually end up striking out last night. So first one of the year coming in game number 12. Not bad, all things considered there. But again, this is a team that from an offensive standpoint has been solid so far. Again, has beaten teams early in the season the way that you were expecting them to beat them with the run rules and all that kind of stuff, but certainly don't want to keep leaving guys on base, and you know, wanting to continue to make solid contact to hopefully lead to more success when SEC play does start here very, very soon. Going to be a quick turnaround. Got Davidson coming up later this afternoon, not even a night game. First pitch is at 3 o'clock, 2:45 airtime. You'll be able to listen to that on our sister station, ESPN 1320 WISW, because, of course, we have men's basketball coming up tonight at 6:30 pregame, 6:30 pregame, 7 o'clock tip with men's basketball taking on Tennessee. This is a Davidson team for you know, South Carolina, coming in 4-7 on the season. They have one of the worst staff ERAs in all of Division I baseball at 10.19, which is 270th. So hopefully this is an opportunity for South Carolina to once again continue to have a strong showing from the bats, and hopefully not leave many runners on base tonight at the end of the day. You know, the 2 midweek games they've played so far this season, Tuesday games against UNC Charlotte and Duke, Davidson has lost those games a combined 41-4 or 41-1. So again, you feel confident about South Carolina tonight, or this afternoon, excuse me. Hopefully the weather holds out. Storm's supposed to kind of roll back in sometime around 5 o'clock. So if nothing else, maybe you can at least get to the halfway point, make this a legal game, and, you know, we'll see what happens from there. But hopefully get at least a few innings in before the rains end up coming in. And again, who knows what ends up happening there. But just another opportunity for some good reps, and hopefully we're talking about another South Carolina baseball victory and getting that 10th win on the season through 13 games by this time tomorrow. Speaking of this time tomorrow, as I mentioned earlier, hopefully we're talking about another monumental win and another feather in the cap for what's been an incredible season for Lamont Paris and company on the hardwood. We'll hear from what Lamont Paris had to say last night on Carolina Calls and start previewing this matchup with Tennessee coming up. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Wednesday morning here on The Game. Welcome back in. Tyler Head along with you, the Extra Point on your Wednesday morning. Cap and Dave producing on the other side of the glass. Appreciate you guys, as always, for watching on the Game TV, sponsored by Shepherd's Glass. Go to youtube.com, search Game TV, and watch us all day long here on The Game. You can also listen to us on the 107.5 The Game app. Just download it on your app store and take us wherever you go as well. Of course, tonight, Colonial Life Arena, 7 o'clock. Pre-game coverage starting at 6:30 right here on The Game. Massive game. Certainly the biggest game of the Lamont Paris era. One of the, if not the biggest games in the Colonial Life Arena era, at least for South Carolina men's basketball. If there's a bigger game that you can think of, please let me know. 803-404-6100 on the Firehouse Subs text line, because tonight holds massive implications. And if you would have gone back before the season, with all the prognostications of South Carolina finishing at the bottom of the SEC and all that kind of stuff, not saying that you would have believed that, because I thought they had a shot at being somewhere in the middle tier of the SEC, which would have been an improvement on a season ago, but none of us saw this kind of season coming. Again, if you would have looked at the schedule before the season started and looked at playing Tennessee in the final week of the regular season, it would have been safe to assume, like, all right, Tennessee probably fighting for one of the top seeds in the country, which they are predicted as a 2 seed in Lenardi's latest bracketology. Still has a shot to get up to number 1 if things go well for them over the next week or so through the SEC tournament. And you probably would have thought, like, South Carolina, hopefully maybe a bubble team-ish on the edge of making the NCAA tournament, or at least in the conversation, to where going into this game, if you lose to Tennessee, it's not that big of a deal because they're at the top of the mountain. And you would hope South Carolina would have a decent resume at that point in time to make a case for for making the NCAA tournament, probably looking at going in the SEC tournament next weekend, saying, all right, you probably want to win 2 games at least to feel comfortable about yourself getting in as far as Selection Sunday goes. But obviously now, having known the story of the season written up to this point, much different. Yes, like I said, Tennessee is one of the top seeds in the country and fighting to be a number 1 overall seed over the course of these next couple games. And South Carolina, solidly in the NCAA tournament with a chance to get the double bye in the SEC tournament next week. Oh, by the way, also having the opportunity to win the SEC regular season crown overall if these next 2 games end up going South Carolina's way. So, again, just a testament to what Coach Paris has done, up to this point this season. And with the loss last night by Alabama, if South Carolina can beat Tennessee tonight and hold the advantage over them this season, and then proceed to beat Mississippi State on Saturday, you can outright claim the SEC regular season championship, which, again, is just would have been not unfathomable, but shocked a lot of people if we would have said something about that before this season started. So, again, we can't, I continue to laud more accolades at Coach Paris and what he's been able to do, but it is truly, truly remarkable. And hopefully you're all enjoying what the season has been, because there's no guarantees that this is going to continue going forward. You hope it's going to, but certainly, want to live in the moment and appreciate this for everything that it currently is. Let's go cut number 12 here, Dave. This is Coach Paris last night in Carolina Calls, talking about earning the opportunity to playing in big games like this. So I was talking
normally with a 2-day prep, we've morphed into doing more 1-day preps for a team. We usually spend that first day on a self-scout. What did we do that we should do better? This is in our DNA as a team. It's important to us. Could we do that better? So we do a lot of skill work, breaking things down, drill stuff. And so I think that was good to be able to have one practice where we weren't even really thinking about what the next game was. We were thinking about how do we get better? How can we be better at this time of year? And then we turned our attention more towards Tennessee at today's practice. And so, but we also didn't shy away from the fact that, it's a big game. It's a big game. And you work really hard so that it is a big game. You could also play this whole season and this game would be insignificant to your team because you're not in position for it to be a big game. We've earned the right for this to be a big game. So let's acknowledge the fact that it's a big game. Let's rejoice in the fact that we've earned that, and then let's go out and play free and play.
Pressure is a privilege. as I mentioned, if we looked this before the season started, we probably would have thought this game would have been largely inconsequential for South Carolina at this point in the season, where, again, you're taking on a team that's as a projected number 2 seed right now. Losing to them doesn't hurt if you're, again, a team that's on the bubble. You'd certainly like to win, obviously, but it wouldn't have derailed anything necessarily. So for South Carolina to be in this position now, to be fighting for the SEC regular season crown and potentially looking at maybe a 4 seed or something themselves, they can pick up this win and continue on over the next couple games as well. It's something you have to earn, and they've certainly done that up to this point. Now, this is going to be a Tennessee team that's looking for revenge. They're out for blood. You came into their arena and did something no team had done in 40-some-odd games and beat them. Not only beat them, you controlled them from the jump. This wasn't a buzzer beater or, a last-second shot or something like that. This was a game that South Carolina controlled from the jump. And that's going to be a big key coming up tonight, tonight as well. And this is a Tennessee team, since you beat them, they've been playing great. Minus a one loss on the road at Texas A&M, which a lot of teams had trouble on the road in College Station prior to that losing skid that Texas A&M, went on. So this is a team that's different than what you saw back in January. One thing that's not different, though, is Dalton Knecht and being the dominant player that he's been all season long. Slowing him down is going to be a key once again tonight. Here's Lamont Paris, cut number 11 here, Dave, talking about trying to limit Dalton Knecht.
I don't care who scores on my team, and I can't control who shoots on the other team. We can do some things to try to limit this or that. I can't control. If they want to have him shoot 40 times, he's probably going to score 45 points. And that would be the narrative, right? Dalton Knecht scores 45 points on 40 shots. That's not that efficient. So I think we did a good job of staying between him and the rim. We wanted to eliminate a couple things. Eliminate layups. Which sounds pretty basic, right? But harder to do than it is to say. Eliminate layups, eliminate transition buckets for him. I think he did have 2 points in transition. And then eliminate stare-down threes. Make him shoot his threes off the move. He can make all those. There's no shot that he can't make. Right. There's just some that he's going to be more likely to make, and he's going to be more comfortable. So I thought we did a good job with that. He also missed a couple that he might make normally. A couple tough pull-ups in the middle of the paint. This guy's a player. He's a real offensive weapon, and he's going to make some of those. But you just want guys to work for the points that they do get. More importantly than the job we did on him, I think you had Zakai Ziegler had 2 points. Jonas Adu, I don't know how many points he had, but it wasn't a lot.
He had 6
in that game, right? Those are 2 key cogs for them. So while we're talking about what Dalton Knecht does, I've mentioned this before. There's a world in which Dalton Knecht scores 9 points and they score 80. There's also, and they win that one probably. There's also a world in which he scores 31 and they're held to 59, one of their lowest on the entire season, right? And they probably don't win that one. So I don't care who shoots for that team or who scores. I'm worried about the total body of work.
Similarly to the last game that they played at the end of January, Knecht's going to get his. He scored 31 points in that game. He did it on 24 shots, though. And it wasn't until the final couple of minutes of that game that he really got into his rhythm. Scared South Carolina a little bit, but they were able to hold on for the victory. The biggest key was limiting the guys around him. Adu and Ziegler combined for 8 points in that game. That is an anomaly for what those guys usually do this season. So if you can implore that same type of physicalness and slow them down like you did last time, South Carolina has an opportunity to win this game. Which, by the way, when you look at Tennessee and what they've done this season in terms of games that they have lost in conference play, there is a common theme. I mentioned that game against Texas A&M a couple weeks back, lost that one. Also lost on the road to Mississippi State earlier on in January. Those are 2 physical basketball teams in road environments. Well, guess what? They're going on the road tonight. South Carolina's a physical basketball team. That's something that, again, could play into South Carolina's hand, and hopefully they could walk away with the victory when it's all said and done. But, again, team coming out, they're going to be out for blood, out for revenge, all that kind of stuff. Not going to be easy to handle. Playing better basketball than they were back in January. It's going to be a good game. Very excited to see what happens tonight at Colonial Life Arena. Again, tip-off coming up at 7 o'clock. Pregame coverage starting right here on the game at 6:30. We'll get a little bit of the Tennessee perspective. Going to be talking to Russell Smith from Fox Sports Knoxville coming up next here on the Extra Point, and we'll get some insight onto the mindset from the Volunteers as they head into Colonial Life Arena coming up later on tonight. And again, that's coming up next. Tyler Head along with you here on the Extra Point on the game. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, it is disgusting outside, raining cats and dogs out there. And anytime it rains hard or you experience any kind of storm, you should always be mindful of what's going on in the crawl space under your home. Because if you have a crawl space that's open, you may have standing water underneath your home. High humidity and condensation in your crawl space creates an environment for mold, mildew, and pests, including termites. That moisture can lead to things like wood rot and floor joist problems. And musty smells and awful odors that come from mold and mildew in your crawl space can cause health issues such as runny nose, itchy eyes, coughs, things like that, because up to half of the air that you breathe in your home comes from your crawl space. If you're having any issues with your crawl space, check out our friends at Canty Foundation Specialists. Go online to cantycanfixit.com, and they'll send a professional out there to evaluate your home's crawl space, get you fixed up just right so you and your family can live comfortably. Again, Canty Foundation Specialist online at cantycanfixit.com. Welcome back in. This is the Extra Points Hour along with you on this Wednesday morning, getting you set for the big matchup tonight at Colonial Life Arena between the Gamecocks and the Tennessee Volunteers, vying for that top spot in the SEC for that SEC regular season crown. To get things from a Volunteer perspective, we now welcome in on the Love Chevrolet phone lines Russell Smith from Fan Run Radio, Fox Sports Knoxville. Russell, first of all, thanks so much for taking a little bit of your time this morning. Last time I talked to you and your crew was on your show a couple hours before these two teams tipped off back at the end of January. Of course, South Carolina went in and picked up a surprising victory to a lot of people up there in Knoxville. Since then, though, Tennessee has minus one game blip against Texas A&M has been on seemingly a bit of a warpath. What is different about this Tennessee team than the one that South Carolina saw at the end of January?
Yeah, Tyler, great speaking with you. Thanks for having me. I don't think the SEC schedulers could have foresaw Tennessee at South Carolina the last week of season being a de facto SEC championship game whenever they put the schedule together a couple of months ago. But here we are. Yeah, I mean, Tennessee is playing well right now. They're peaking at the right time. They've won, I believe, 6 games in a row headed into tonight. And it's hard to put your finger on it, but things are clicking right now. Obviously, Dalton Knecht is having a great season. But you go back to the last game Tennessee played at Alabama, a big win, and Dalton Knecht didn't have a great game. I think he was held to about 14 points against the Crimson Tide. And that's the interesting thing is Knecht is probably going to be SEC Player of the Year this year, but Tennessee basketball has really been at its best when the Vols are getting a balanced effort around the board, when you've got 4 or 5 starters scoring in double figures. It was that way in Tennessee's win at Rupp Arena over Kentucky in February, and it was that way at Alabama, probably the 2 biggest road wins Tennessee has had this season. So I have a feeling that's what Rick Barnes is hoping for tonight, is that Tennessee will not have to rely on Dalton Knecht to do it all by himself, but will rely on a more balanced effort with contributions from Zakai Ziegler, Santiago Vescovi, Jonas Adu, and maybe even a couple of guys off the bench like they had Saturday night in Tuscaloosa.
And off of that, going back to the game they played in January, Knecht had 31 points. It was on 24 shots, and Vescovi was the only other guy that scored in double figures. How did they go about getting more of these guys involved in the offense and scoring at a better clip compared to the last time these two teams played?
Yeah, I mean, that was, South Carolina was able to pull Tennessee into their trap and drag them into their kind of game. And Tennessee only put up 59 points in that last game in Knoxville. Oversimplifying it, but maybe just make shots. My recollection of that first game against South Carolina is Tennessee missed about 10 or so just point-blank layups that the Volunteers usually make. It started on the first play with Jonas Adu, who had a clear drive to the basket and just blew a layup. So I think that, not that Tennessee was overlooking South Carolina that first time around, but the Gamecocks at that point were a little bit more upstart. It was early in the season. I believe it was Tennessee's 6th conference game of the season at that point. And, certainly now everybody knows South Carolina's story. They're one of the best teams in the conference. They're a top 25 team. And, forget the revenge factor, first of all, or the fact that Tennessee's playing for a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. You got a chance to win the SEC title tonight. If you're Tennessee, you win tonight, you are outright SEC champs. So, I mean, so many motivational factors going into this one. I can't imagine that you'll get anything than, both teams' best effort tonight.
Again, talking to Russell Smith from Fox Sports Knoxville, getting the Volunteer perspective ahead of tonight's game. Is it tough to transition from playing a team like Alabama on the this past weekend on the road that is very up-tempo, high-flying offense that doesn't put a whole lot of stock in what they do from the defensive side to doing a 180 and going to a team in South Carolina that prides itself on its defense like they're going to do tonight?
Yeah, great question. Alabama, I mean, what a weird team they are, right? Number 1 overall nationally in KenPom and offensive efficiency, and I think they were about 100th in defensive efficiency. Don't play a lot of defense. South Carolina, completely different team. And I would, I would love to mirror that question back to you, Tyler. It's like, is South Carolina, I assume they're going to try and turn this into a rock fight and slow things down. I watched a little bit of the game against Florida over the weekend, and they really flummoxed the Gators with that zone late in the game. Todd Golden and company just could not figure it out. And, when I think of South Carolina basketball under Lamont Paris, I think hard-nosed, man-to-man defense. Let's drain the shot clock and make teams play to our pace, dictate the tempo of the game. Do you think that's what South Carolina's game plan is going to be again tonight?
Yeah, and that's something that we've seen them break out a couple different times this season. Florida this past weekend, they were trailing against Georgia on the road earlier this season as well, and Georgia was just killing them with the three-pointers in the first half of that game. Went to that 1-3-1 zone, which, again, is not something you see a whole lot of at a consistent clip in college basketball, and again, threw them completely off. Zach Davis does a really good job at kind of running the point of that 1-3-1 zone defense. So, again, they don't break out every single game. It's more been kind of when they've been behind going into second halves of some of these games, but going back to the Tennessee game at the end of January, that was a game that South Carolina pretty much controlled from the jump and didn't really, I guess, feel the need to go to something like that. But if, let's say, Tennessee's up by 7-8 points at halftime and, again, is, killing them from beyond the arc or something like that, I could see South Carolina implementing that once again in the second half of the game for a period of time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Tennessee only shot 23.8% from three-point range in that first game against South Carolina, only made 5 of 21 threes. That happens again tonight. South Carolina is going to win the game. Tennessee shot 40 threes at Alabama the other night. That's a little bit high, so I would expect Tennessee to try and shoot more. Now, obviously, there are more possessions in that game against Alabama than there were against South Carolina, but Tennessee wants to force the tempo, wants to get rolling a little bit. I mean, they're not to the Alabama or Kentucky degree of wanting to play up and down full court basketball, but they don't want to get into a grinded out half court possession game like they did last time against the Gamecocks. I think that would favor South Carolina.
When you're looking at this season as a whole, very few blemishes on the resume for Tennessee. Had that run of playing just some of the best teams in the country, Purdue, Kansas, and North Carolina. But after that, just a couple of losses in conference play, including the one to South Carolina at home. But they're in position to be a top seed in the NCAA tournament, sitting at number 2 right now in Lenardi's latest bracketology. Obviously, as you mentioned, have the chance to lock up the SEC regular season crown if they can pick up the win tonight in Colonial Life Arena. Everybody always asks the question, is this a Tennessee team that can finally make a run to the Final Four? Do you see that in the cards for this team if they handle their business going forward?
Oh, man, that would just mean the world to Tennessee fans. Tennessee's history in the NCAA tournament combined with Rick Barnes' personal history in the NCAA tournament, that's part of the narrative, right? It is what it is. It has not been great. Rick Barnes has the one Final Four at Texas back in 2003, but otherwise, his NCAA tournament record has been less than stellar. Tennessee has been to the NCAA tournament 25 times, never made it to the Final Four, made it to the Elite Eight in 2010, and lost to Michigan State at the very end of that game. So, this is one of the more talented teams that Tennessee has had. And it would be, there are a lot of people who are saying, well, if not now, then when? That's a lot of pressure to put on a team, but it is a good-looking team. They are built for the postseason, but as you know, Tyler, so much of it, there's a little bit of luck that comes into it. It's about matchups. It's about draws, where you're at. Now, if Tennessee gets the 1 seed, that almost puts more pressure on them, right? Because, again, if you're not going to do it this year, when are you going to do it? When you've got a player like Dalton Knecht, you've got role players on the team that are playing their roles almost perfectly here. It feels like you're peaking at the right time. So on paper, yes, this should be a year that Tennessee could potentially take it to a Final Four, but that history looms large, and there are a lot of Tennessee fans that are kind of, taking the "I'll believe it when I see it" approach.
Again, talking to Russell Smith from Fox Sports Knoxville. One more to slide in here, about 60 seconds. Got to ask a non-basketball question. The news coming out last week of the NCAA once again losing in the court to the combined lawsuit between Tennessee, the Attorney Generals of Tennessee and Virginia. What's the sense in Knoxville of, being at the precipice of taking another chunk out of the NCAA's power?
Yeah, just a palpable sense of relief, put it that way, because this feels like a potentially special season for Josh Heupel and the Vols. Nico Iamaleava is a special talent at quarterback. You got a lot of guys on defense back. This should be a really good team, and there was a worry that, is the NCAA going to come in here and try and rule Nico ineligible, or are they going to try and take another turn? Tennessee's already on probation. They got slapped on the wrist from the Jeremy Pruitt stuff. So it's a couple of missing scholarships there that you have to contend with, but didn't want anything on top of that. This seems to have put the NCAA on the back pedal. Be very surprised if they were to continue to push the envelope and try to come after Tennessee. So again, just a sense of relief and a hope that Tennessee, we can put this behind us and move forward, because they've been dealing with the NCAA for 4 years now, going back to the end of the Jeremy Pruitt era.
Right. Absolutely. Well, appreciate your insight. Very excited to see what happens at Colonial Life Arena. Should be a good game.
Thanks, Tyler. Have a great day, my man.
Appreciate it as always. Russell Smith from Fox Sports Knoxville. We'll come back, wrap up the hour, get some of your text on the Firehouse Subs text line here on the Extra Point on the Game. Welcome back in. It's Extra Point. Tyler Head with you. Captain Dave producing on the other side of the glass. Thank you once again to Russell Smith from Fox Sports Knoxville for hanging out with us for a few minutes there and getting a little bit of insight into the Volunteers' perspective heading in tonight's massive matchup at Colonial Life Arena. You know, it's funny. We talked about it going into this past week, and it had been 7 years since South Carolina had hosted another ranked opponent at Colonial Life Arena, and now you're having 2 games in a week. Just shows you where this program's at, and it's very exciting. Speaking of basketball and other exciting things going on, women's team getting set for the SEC Women's Tournament, which gets rolling today. They, of course, have the double bye being the top seed, which means they will not play until Friday afternoon at noon, which you'll be able to listen to right here on the Gamer Guy. Elijah Campbell actually up there in Greenville, going to be hanging out for the entire SEC Women's Basketball Tournament. We'll be doing daily updates, including coming up at 10:15 this morning, so a little less than half an hour away from that, and that is sponsored by our friends over at Cool Care Heating and Air, as Elijah will give us a preview on what to expect today and with what South Carolina's got going on tournament as well. Want to head out to the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. Brock weighs in, says, need you to answer the question, please, because I don't know. Do the Gamecocks win the SEC regular season title with a win tonight, or do they have to win out? What would we need to do for our other teams, because I haven't found anything on Twitter about it. All right, so roll with me here. Let's lay out all the possibilities of what can happen tonight and this upcoming weekend and what that means for South Carolina. If South Carolina beats Tennessee coming up tonight, they would have identical records in conference play at 12-4. Auburn and Alabama are both sitting at 12-5. So those two teams right now don't have a shot at winning the SEC regular season crown if South Carolina or Tennessee end up winning the next 2 games. And again, both those teams do hold wins over South Carolina. However, South Carolina has a better record in conference play as of right now. If South Carolina wins tonight and they win on Saturday against Mississippi State, they would have a conference record of 14-4. Now, if Tennessee loses tonight and they still manage to beat Kentucky on Saturday, that means that both South Carolina and Tennessee would have identical records in conference play of 14-4. That means that they would share the SEC regular season crown, and the tiebreakers would go to determining the seeding for the SEC tournament. Now, again, if South Carolina wins tonight, that means they would have defeated Tennessee in both their contests. So that means South Carolina would go in as the top overall seed in the SEC tournament next weekend. Now, if South Carolina wins tonight and wins on Saturday against Mississippi State, and Tennessee loses tonight and proceeds to lose to Kentucky on Saturday, then South Carolina would then claim the outright SEC regular season championship by themselves, because they would be the only team in the conference with only 4 losses. They would have the best record overall, nobody else tied with them. That would potentially set the table for a 4-way tie potentially for second place, with Tennessee, the Alabama schools, and possibly Kentucky as well. And again, that's a lot of moving parts and pieces, a lot of games to be played around the conference, so all that can change. But South Carolina controls its own destiny. That's the most important thing to remember from this. If they win tonight and they win on Saturday, they will at the very least have a share of the SEC regular season crown with Tennessee. And again, if Tennessee loses on Saturday to Kentucky as well, then South Carolina wins it outright. And again, the tiebreakers are only important for the SEC tournament next week. There's no, they will crown 6 SEC regular season champions in a tie scenario if they have to. Like, that is not something where they split hairs in determining who wins it outright or not. But again, South Carolina has the opportunity to be the outright champion. If they handle their business these next 2 games, it gets a little bit of help from Kentucky coming up on Saturday. But regardless, can still be a part of the SEC championship in the regular season just by winning these next 2 contests, which, again, is just a testament to how far they've come and what they've been able to do in what has been a very, very fun season here for the Gamecocks. I brought this up the other week, growing up, following Georgia basketball and all that kind of stuff, they never gave me all that many like things to be excited about. Yeah, they won the SEC tournament in 2008. That was cool. Made a couple of tournament appearances, but other than that, never made any true noise, at least in my lifetime, to really get behind. This South Carolina team has been a thrill to watch from the very beginning, and I'm very excited to see where this ride ends up taking the team as far as the postseason does go. We'll dive back into this conversation here, a little bit more of what Lamont Paris had to say last night in Carolina Calls, and kind of gauge the perspective where this team was the first time they played back at the end of January. That's all coming up. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday morning, getting you set for a huge, huge night of basketball at Colonial Life Arena. Caponea producing on the other side of the glass. Hour number 2 coming up here on The Game. Hour number 2, it is the Extra Point. Tyler Head with you on this Wednesday morning. Capper Dave producing on the other side of the glass. Before we jump back into the basketball conversation, I want to remind you once again to get in on the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. $25 gets added to the pot each and every Gamecock baseball game. Whenever a Gamecock hitter hits a Grand Slam, you could be the lucky recipient of however much money is in that pot when that Grand Slam is hit. Left the bases loaded 3 times last night. I thought in each one of those innings that maybe it was finally going to happen, but it did not happen just yet. $25 more added to the pot for this afternoon's game, taking on Davidson. So again, each and every week, going over to 1075thegame.com and make sure you are registered. So when that Grand Slam happens, you could be the lucky recipient of the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Going back to my conversation with Russell Smith about 30 minutes ago about where this Tennessee team was at the end of January compared to where they are now. And they're playing great basketball right now. Again, compare with minus that 1-game blip against Texas A&M. Dalton Knecht playing out of his mind. You know, the 39 points that he dropped the other day against was that Auburn, I think. Again, it's a different animal of the team. But let's rewind the clock back and let's think about where South Carolina was on January the 30th. When that first game was played up there in Knoxville. They were 5-2 in conference play. You knew they were good, but you didn't know how good. They had lost that rough game to Alabama where the second half just got away from them. They lost that game to Georgia where they couldn't make their free throws late in the game. And on the flip side of things, they'd beaten Kentucky the week before. And we're all like, hey, that's fantastic. But at the same time, you had seen that same movie the season before where you went on the road to Rupp Arena and picked up a victory early on in conference play against a Kentucky team. And at that point in time, we thought, hey, maybe this is going to be something. And, of course, things went off the rails for the most part in conference play after that. So we weren't really sure how legit this team was from, an SEC standpoint until the Tennessee game. Because when you went in there and controlled it, again, a place that nobody had come in there and won in like 2 years. And when you controlled that from the jump, that's where we all kind of looked at each other and said, okay, this is pretty good. This is a team that can do something this season. And that was kind of I feel like, real starting point for us believing that this team could truly be something this season. And they've obviously back that up in all the games they played since and now have an opportunity to face off against that same team once again. And I remember going into that game back at the end of January where it's like, hey, again, Tennessee's won like 44 straight home games. If you don't win, just don't get embarrassed. Because the 2 times they played Tennessee last year in Lamont Paris' first year, they got run out of the building. They got dominated by 40-some-odd points in both those games. So the bar of success against Tennessee wasn't going to be very high. Just don't go get blown out like you did a season ago. Show that improvement. Show that you're a better team than you were last season. And, obviously winning at the end of the day proves that. But even if they hadn't won, I feel like, if you would have gone in there and lost by 4 or 5 points, you still would have felt pretty good about where South Carolina was at that point in time. Obviously, going there and winning makes you feel even better. The numbers, of course, are going to favor Tennessee in this matchup, as most of the numbers have against all of South Carolina's opponents as of late. We love looking at the matchup predictor on ESPN, and guess what? It is 78.5% leaning towards Tennessee and only 21.5% leaning towards South Carolina. Very similar numbers to what they had at A&M and on the road at Ole Miss. And I think Florida was even favored this past weekend as well. So South Carolina is no stranger to being the underdog in these matchups, and that will be no doubt the same situation coming up tonight. One guy that was a big key in that game in Knoxville earlier on in the season was Miles Stute. Had 13 points in that game, went 3 from 3 from the three-point line, and has been dealing with an injury here as of late. Coach Paris last night in Carolina Calls, be cut number 5 here, Dave, gave an update on where Miles Stute is at.
I think he's, in talking with the trainers and him after practice, he feels pretty good about where he is physically and wants to try to give it a go. So I think some of it we'll see how the game's going, and but don't be surprised if we see him out there, and then how he responds to. It's one thing to do it at practice, and then you get in the game and it's live, and so we'll see what that looks like. But luckily for him, he's made really good progress with it. It hasn't been as severe as what it could have been, and so his teammates and his coaches and myself, we're all looking forward to getting him back in the fold. But tomorrow, don't be shocked if he gets out there some tomorrow just to see what it looks like, in a real life scenario.
So he's going to give it a go. We know that much. We'll see if he's limited at all, because, of course, that's not his first injury this season. And funny enough, that Tennessee game back in January was also his return from injury after he gotten hurt in that Georgia game, a couple weeks prior. So no stranger to coming back against a very good Tennessee team, and hopefully he can go out there and put together a similar performance to what we saw up in Knoxville. And it's really funny, and I don't say this in a disrespectful way. I think it's more of a compliment to the team as a whole, but you almost kind of didn't really notice that he wasn't out there these past couple games. And again, I mean that in the most respectful way possible, because South Carolina was still able to win. South Carolina was still able to run the offense the way they wanted to do it, and they were still able to have guys step up. And mentioned Zach Davis kind of, while not a three-point shooter like Miles Stute is, was able to score a little bit more than what he had done, on average with Stute being out. So, and that's, again, to me, the sign of a really good and healthy team, that even when one of your best players is out for a couple of games, they are, it's not as glaring of an issue. Like, oh, man, well, if South Carolina's going to be praying that, Stute comes back the next game or whatever it is, because they can't function without him on the offense or coming off the bench or whatever it may be. No, South Carolina picks up the slack and distributes whatever workload that Miles Stute was going to do to other guys on the team, and they respond to it. As I mentioned, Zach Davis has kind of stepped up in that role here as of late, and if you can add Stute back to the mix tonight, that's great, and that just gives you a little bit more dimension on your offense, and another guy that can shoot some of those deep balls that might be a key tonight in taking down Tennessee for the second time this season. Tonight at Colonial Life Arena is also going to be senior night. Going to recognize a couple of seniors that have been an integral part to this program, even though only for the single season, but still a very important part of what this team's been able to do. And Coach Paris talked last night, cut number 3 here, Dave, about recognizing those guys coming up tonight.
I always thought a certain way and felt a certain way about that. And, you're providing opportunities for these young men, right? Opportunities to play at a different level, opportunities to win more than they have, opportunities to be closer to home, all kinds of opportunities that you're providing for these young men. And, it's amazing how close you can get to people in 1 year. And in fact, last summer, I went to the wedding of one of my former players at Chattanooga, who was a one-year guy. He had spent 3 of his first 4 years at the University of Kansas. He came to us for his last year, and he was with us for 1 year, and he wanted to make sure I was at his wedding. We got another guy, Matt Ryan, was a one-year guy for us at Chattanooga, transferred from Vanderbilt. Played for 1 year for us. I think he calls me his coach when it's all said and done in the 1 year that I was there. So it's amazing how Hayden Brown, it's amazing how close Gigi Jackson was only here for a year. Right. It's amazing how close you can get to these guys in 1 year. And so we want to do a really good job with the senior day and showing appreciation for what these guys have helped us develop here as a program, not just what this team is doing right now, but years from now, these guys will be guys that people will look back on as being on the ground floor of the foundation that we've built.
And talking particularly there about the guys like B.J. Mack, Talon Cooper, and Stephen Clark, I believe Stute and Gray, I believe, have at least another year of eligibility. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's the case. But again, talking about Clark Cooper and B.J. Mack, just a couple of those guys that came in here as, played a ton of basketball at a ton of places. Talked about Talon Cooper and his time at Morehead State in Minnesota. Obviously, BJ Mack more locally here at Wofford, as well as Stephen Clark at the at the Citadel. And we didn't know, bringing these guys in, how they would gel and how they would work together. It's one thing to look at the numbers that they were able to put up individually at these other schools, but that doesn't mean they're all going to be able to come together and function as one unit. And from all the indications we heard in the off season, the Bahamas trip, all that kind of stuff, that everything was looking good, and these guys were going to be a good cohesive unit, and they certainly ended up being that. And we've talked about this so much this season that this is one of the most veteran groups in all of Division I basketball. And when you look at KenPom, they assign a number to that. South Carolina, based on their experience, is 25th overall in D1 experience in Division I basketball, which, again, I think goes a long way with what this team's been able to accomplish this year. You just have a lot of guys on this team, mainly these senior guys that are getting recognized tonight, that have just been around and done that. And had a lot of experiences and a lot of maturity through the game of college basketball that's translated into what this team has been able to do this season. And even when they've had those low points, like the back-to-back losses against Auburn and LSU, they came back and responded. And it didn't really seem to faze them all that much. And that's a testament to a experienced and veteran team, and one that hopefully can do something special over these next couple weeks in the tournament. You think back to that 2017 team and some of the names that still get talked about there. Sindarius Thornwell, PJ Dozier, guys that are going to go down in history for the legacy that they leave behind for having a special season like they did. And we can be very much talking the same way about BJ Mack, about Talon Cooper, about guys like Miles Studi, and so on and so forth, that were an integral part of maybe only one season at South Carolina, but a very important season that's going to go down in history, hopefully, as one of the greatest of all time. A lot of basketball to be played still. Got to get through tonight's game. Got to get through the, Mississippi State, get through the tournament and all that kind of stuff before you focus on the big dance. But, everything that we've seen up to this point should give you a lot of confidence in what this team's going to be capable of going through the month of March. Speaking of making way through the month of March, the women's team getting set for their march towards hopefully another national championship coming up, starting with the SEC Women's Tournament. They'll be in action coming up on Friday as they have the double bye, and will await the winner of Texas A&M, Mississippi State, who take each other on tomorrow afternoon. Our guy Elijah Campbell going to be up in Greenville at Bon Secours Wellness Arena all weekend long, keeping us updated on everything going on with the SEC Women's Tournament. We will talk to him coming up next. It is all brought to you by our friends over at Cool Care Heating and Air right here on The Game. Welcome back in. It's the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Wednesday morning. Obviously, plenty more to get into with the huge game coming up at Colonial Life Arena tonight between South Carolina and Tennessee, but plenty of other important basketball going on in the state of South Carolina as well. Things getting started this morning at 11 a.m. for the SEC Women's Tournament. Again, the women's team will be playing on Friday, getting that double bye, awaiting the winner of A&M and Mississippi State. Our guy Elijah Campbell going to be up there all weekend long, keeping up with everything going on at the Bon Scores Wellness Arena. Elijah, I wanted to start off with this, though. The SEC awards were announced yesterday, and Dawn Staley taking home SEC Coach of the Year. And I know a lot of people from a national perspective might roll their eyes and say, oh, the best coach of the best program taking home Coach of the Year. But we've talked about this plenty of times. When you lose what might be the best class South Carolina has ever seen in the freshies a season ago, to do what they've done this year and be undefeated with this new crop of talent taking on bigger roles is truly remarkable.
Following the #1 ranked Gamecocks through the SEC Women's Tournament.
Live from Greenville, here's Elijah Campbell.
Sponsored by Cool Care Heating and Air. Don't miss your bank shot with your HVAC or plumbing. Check them out at coolcarehvac.com.
On the Game Network.
And now the floor is yours, Elijah.
Yes. After a word from our friends at Cool Care Heating and Air, who shout out to them for letting me come, sponsoring this and letting me come down to Greenville to cover this tournament, because it will be a treat to see exactly what Dawn Staley, now the 3rd time in a row SEC Coach of the Year, and her team's going to be able to do in this tournament. But I think the case for her being the SEC Coach of the Year is the same that's going to be for her winning National Coach of the Year. I mean, it's getting a whole new starting five and adding in 2 freshmen into the major rotation with Tessa Johnson and Malaysia Fulwiley, and then throwing in Tahina Papau as a transfer, getting the biggest transfer probably in the transfer market, one of, and having zero window of disappointment. Because, every now and then, like in the monotony of the season in January and February, you slip up and somebody gets you. Hasn't happened this year, and really outside of the Tennessee game, all the wins have been by double digits, Tennessee and LSU. So I think that's kind of the biggest takeaway so far, the biggest case you can make for Dawn Staley being not just the SEC Coach of the Year, but the National Coach of the Year.
And again, South Carolina won't play until Friday, getting that double bye. They'll await the winner of A&M and Mississippi State, who play tomorrow coming up at noon. But the tournament gets rolling later on this morning, really in about 40 minutes from now. Georgia and Kentucky tip things off, and then Missouri and Florida follow them a little bit later on this afternoon. They, of course, occupy the 4 lowest seeds in the SEC. But looking back to last year, A&M is a 13th seed and Kentucky is a 14th seed. Both made it into the quarterfinals. Do you see any of these 4 teams that are playing today that have the opportunity to make some kind of run in this tournament?
The team that I feel like probably has the best chance to do that is Georgia, and that's for 2 reasons. One, they have a go-to scorer in Javin Nicholson. She's averaging over 16 points a game, and in 3 of her last 5 games, she scored at least 26 or more points, and that includes the game at South Carolina where she scored 27 and grabbed 12 rebounds and really became the star of that game. They have a good go-to scorer down the post, and they run a defense that you don't see everywhere. And in a tournament setting where you kind of have to get ready for teams in a short turnaround, even if you're a conference foe and you have a little bit of the book on them, it's hard to prepare for a matchup zone defense. And Coach A brought that over with her from UCF, and she said in the press conference after the South Carolina game, it's taken a while to implement because it is a complex defense. It's not quite a man. It's not quite a zone. It's a lot of exactly the type of stuff that Virginia men run that have been giving teams, trouble for decades. So it's a tough defense. I think they've finally gotten it figured out to where they can slow teams down. They had a really disappointing regular season, but I thought they played a little better down the stretch. They gave the Gamecocks a really good game on the road, and really surprised me with how they competed. But you have a big scorer who you can go to down the post when game gets pretty tight, and you have a defense that can be tough to prepare against. So out of the 4 teams playing today, I'm a little more lenient towards Georgia being the one that's the more likely to make a run.
Getting our guy Elijah Campbell up in Greenville for the SEC Women's Tournament, starting off today with that game between Kentucky and Georgia coming up at the top of the hour on the SEC Network. As I mentioned, South Carolina awaits the winner of A&M Mississippi State, who will tip off with the game number 1 coming up tomorrow. And when you look at both these teams, and again, we feel South Carolina should be able to handle their business this upcoming weekend, at least through the first couple of rounds of this tournament. But you look at A&M Mississippi State, both in a similar boat, being on that bubble of the NCAA Women's Tournament. How different is it facing a team that is really having to throw the kitchen sink at it, holding on for the fate of their postseason?
Well, you're going to feel what desperation on a basketball court feels like, right? Especially if you're a team like Mississippi State, who has had a really solid season, had some ups and downs. I mean, you remember they have the highlight of beating LSU at home earlier this season, and that is a win they can really hang their hat on, but they've also turned around and had some really bad losses as well. Not only are they going to try to beat you, they're going to try to at least hang in there with you. So whenever the selection committee meets up on Selection Sunday and they're looking at bringing teams in or taking teams out of the equation, they're going to look at how you played South Carolina. And I know Mississippi State left something out there when they came here in the first week of January. I'm sure they're really going to want to try to at least make that score a little closer to show some growth over time. But Mississippi State's going to play desperate. A&M's going to play desperate because A&M got smacked on their home court by South Carolina. The Gamecocks are just going to feel what it is to play a team that has absolutely nothing to lose because the season's on the line already. And whatever those teams do best is what they're going to try to display and give them their best knockout punch.
South Carolina got to play Tennessee twice in the last couple of weeks of the regular season. The Volunteers, the Lady Vols, gave them 2 very tough tests. They were tied at the end of the third quarter up there in Knoxville a couple weeks back. Obviously made things very tight at the end in Colonial Life Arena on Sunday. Of course, South Carolina was able to walk away with both those victories. There's the potential of rematching this team in the semifinals coming up this weekend. You know, is Tennessee the team with the best chance to knock off South Carolina, or is it still LSU as the number 2 seed?
I still feel like it's LSU as a 2, just because LSU has that championship pedigree. They've proven they can do it in this type of setting. Tennessee is almost as equally talented because Rickea Jackson might be one of the best players in the SEC and in the country too. And I think Kelly Harper kind of realized that in the last game at Colonial Life that they can get Rickea in her spots where she does her best work, and that's over in the high post with a turnaround jumper. She didn't have any trouble getting to her spots. I felt like she had a little bit of trouble getting to her spots and making shots the game at Thompson Bowling. But when they came here, she was able to score a ton of points and was a little more comfortable doing it. She became a little more of a mismatch problem than she did in the first game. And I think that might have figured something out because, look, that's the only team in the last 25, 26 games at home that has stayed within single digits of South Carolina. So I think they figured something out where they can at least be able to score points when they want to. The biggest thing with Tennessee is going to be getting stops.
Last thing for you here, speaking of the Volunteers, you obviously have your finger on the pulse of a lot of things going up on Rocky Top. Huge game coming up tonight with the Volunteers coming into Colonial Life Arena. What's the sense from Vol Nation about this game tonight with their chance to lock up the SEC regular season crown tonight?
I think they feel incredibly confident. I think they slayed the Dragon, which is Alabama on the road at Coleman Coliseum, and they did so by holding Alabama to 74 points. Holding the other team to 74 points feels like, an average night at the office, but when you do it to the number 1 efficient offense in the country, you feel pretty good about yourself. Oh, and you did so without Dalton Knecht having to score a bajillion points in that game. He was held under 20. You had other guys step up, and Tennessee really showed why they are, I guess, one of the 3 favorites to take that last 1 seed in the NCAA tournament going in. I think that, Vol fans probably feel that the South Carolina game earlier in the year slipped away because Jonas Adu missed a ton around the basket. Zakai Ziegler wasn't 100%. I think they like the matchup coming here to South Carolina just because they're a different team they were January 30th. And Ziegler's probably the best example of that because of his ability to score and distribute. Since that game, he's been averaging over 15 points and 7.7 assists, and he's shooting above 40% from 3. It took him about a couple months, I would say, to really get to 100% after tearing his ACL in March and having the off-season surgery. It took him a while to get going, but I think Ziegler's back to what he was going towards the end of last year. And I think if most Vol fans that I know and talk to feel confident about this game tonight.
Well, it's going to be a huge one at Colonial Life Arena. Going to have some huge games this weekend out at Bon Scores Wellness Arena as well up in Greenville. Elijah, we'll talk to you tomorrow and Friday as well as you keep us updated on everything going on up there at the SEC Women's Tournament. Again, sponsored by our friends over at Cool Care Heating and Air.
That sounds like a plan. I'll be talking to you guys soon.
All right, sounds good. Again, Elijah Campbell up there at the SEC Women's Tournament. We'll shift gears a little bit. Jen Jensen going to join me on the other side, talking a little bit of NASCAR after another exciting weekend. This past one out at Las Vegas. We'll look ahead to what's coming up this weekend as well at the Phoenix Raceway. That's next. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on The Game.
race has been all Kyle Larson. You put that kid behind the wheel of a race car like this at Hendrick Motorsports, and he will get the job done. Old-fashioned butt whooping all day long. Kyle Larson.
Two of the best in the business come off turn number 4. Reddick got within a car length, but Kyle Larson scores his 24th career win for Rick Hendrick and Chevrolet.
Welcome back in as the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Wednesday. It is time to talk a little bit of racing with Jen Jensen from the early game. That was the call on Sunday on Fox Sports out of Las Vegas. As yes, indeed, Kyle Larson picks up his 3rd career victory out at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway, 2nd in a row dating back to the one that he picked up last fall in the playoffs that punched his ticket to the NASCAR Cup Series championship race. And Jen, it usually does not take long for Larson to pick up that first victory of the season and once again establish himself as a true championship contender.
Man, is that not the truth? And in our pick'em contest in the morning show, I really wish I wanted him, but Reggie Anderson had first pick, so it's like, doggone it, missed out on that. But you're right. He's doing great. As we'll probably talk about, the Chevys are doing great to kick off the season. Larson is just dominant, and it sure looks like history is proving that if he gets 2 stage wins, there's a good chance he's going to win the race.
Absolutely. And as you heard Mike Joy allude to there on the broadcast, 24th career win. He only had 6 career wins when he came into Hendrick Motorsports in 2021. Of course, went on to win the championship that year with that, that magical 10-win season. And, you look at the combination of him and Cliff Daniels, and yes, they're still very early on in their relationship together. But I feel like when it's all said and done, we could be talking about these two guys in the same vein as Jimmy Johnson and Chad Canals and Jeff Gordon and Ray Ebernham.
And I actually heard a comparison to that listening to a broadcast, and they were saying how very similar, especially how they are on the radio, where typically Kyle's responses are yes, yes, okay. There's not he's taken his direction, and there's not a lot of interaction. So it's sounding very familiar of the two teams or two pairings.
Well, that is 2 wins for Hendrick Motorsports on the season, going back to William Byron's victory in the Daytona 500 a couple of weeks back. And as you just alluded to a second ago, 3 for 3 for Chevy in the Cup Series so far this season. And it's really funny when you look at, one of the big stories of the offseason was Toyota coming in with the new Camry and Ford coming in with the Mustang Dark Horse, and how these, cars were going to help them out with downforces at tracks like Las Vegas. And once again, it's Chevrolet not only winning, but as you mentioned, Kyle Larson wins both stages, leads 181 of 267 laps. It really seems like Chevrolet is ahead at this point in time.
Man, no kidding. I mean, because really, you look, and in the top 10, there were only 3 of the Fords that were in that top 10, and Chevy, they just continue to dominate, and it's got to make the other manufacturers kind of scratch their head as to, okay, well, where are we missing the mark?
Whenever we go to whatever the first mile-and-a-half track of the season is, last year, not mile-and-a-half, but non-super speedway type of track. Last year it was Auto Club. This year it's Las Vegas. We always kind of look at the results and kind of figure out what we can try and learn from it. And I feel like, and one of my biggest questions was something like, what's Front Row Motorsports going to be like in their first race outside of a super speedway? And not too much to write home about. It still seems very status quo, kind of across the board from what we saw, at the end of last season. That doesn't mean things can't improve, things can't change, and obviously the Fords and Toyotas going to figure things out with their new car. But as of right now, it still seems like, once again, Chevy's kind of at the top of the game.
Yep, and as we look ahead to Phoenix, Chevy continues to dominate there. So it's like, is this going to be an opportunity with the new package? Is Ford going to be able to step up? Is Toyota going to be able to step up, or is Chevy going to dominate once again?
You alluded to the new package, and, for everything great that the next-gen car has done at the intermediate tracks, which go back to a couple years ago with the Gen 6 car and previous models, intermediate racing at places like Las Vegas and Lowe's Motor Speed or Charlotte Motor Speedway and Kansas and stuff like that was not something anybody looked forward to. Now it's a must-see event. I am so excited for the next intermediate race, whenever that may be, and, seeing these great finishes and great side-by-side battles and all this kind of stuff. It's very much a 180 from what the Gen 6 car was, where we knew going to any kind of short track, even smaller tracks like Phoenix, we're going to put on good racing. Unfortunately, the next gen car has not translated over the same way, and NASCAR season in and season out has gone back to the drawing board, trying to tweak things and change things, hoping for a better result. And once again, we're going to go into Phoenix this weekend with a bigger spoiler, less downforce underneath the car, trying a little bit different tire compound to hopefully get the short track racing back to where it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I mean, we want to be able to see, especially on a one-mile track, you want to see more passing opportunities and things like that, and make it racier, make it more fun to watch. So I appreciate the fact that they're doing that, and they've been out, they were out there testing and getting some good feedback from some of the drivers as to how it's feeling. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this new package impacts things like the short tracks, basically, and the road courses.
One, I think it's even more important, this weekend going to Phoenix. That's also the place where, once again, you're going to be deciding your championship come November. And NASCAR, unfortunately, since they've made the move to Phoenix as the championship race, a lot of those races have been underwhelming, especially the past two with the next-gen car. You want your best possible product on display when you're crowning your champion, and fingers crossed that this weekend we see some indication that that'll be the case come November.
I totally agree. I think it's going to be, I think all eyes are going to be on this because I don't know what the commitments are as far as the season-ending race, but if they have underwhelming results or continue doing that, are they going to have to try to look again for another, or are they set on this and they're just going to try to fix the racing to make sure that the racing is good down the line?
Hey, I'm always going to vote for it to take it back to Homestead. I thought that was the perfect track to claim a champion at.
I would totally agree, and that would be great. Again, I hope we get really good racing at Phoenix so that it can stay out there maybe for a little while. But I do have kind of a soft spot for Homestead, no question.
Again, talking to Jen Jensen from the early game, recapping what happened this past weekend at Las Vegas. And I'm always interested to look at the ratings from races because, especially as NASCAR signed this new television deal coming up next year with their respective partners, ratings are important. And at the end of the day, as long as you're moving in the right direction or staying status quo, you're doing all right. And I was very pleased to see that this weekend's Las Vegas race went up 9% from a year ago. And, you talk about the Netflix documentary, the great two races that NASCAR's had to start the season. And we had a great finish on Sunday with Kyle Larson and Tyler Reddick. Like, these are the starts of the season that you want to see. And it seems like there's a lot more interest in NASCAR this year.
It sure does. And I was kind of thinking about things because, Daytona really got things off to a bang. Atlanta had great ratings, and now Vegas. And you're right, you have the Netflix. I still think Blaney being a champion, I think he's a really good ambassador for the sport. So I think that kind of helped us as well. But even looking at adding Kevin Harvick to the booth, I don't think that hurt anything. I think he does a really good job. I don't think people are necessarily tuning in just to listen to him, but I think he's been a great addition to the broadcast. Bringing in the Chicagoland race, I think that was something else that may have contributed. And as you look at even the lower ranks, you've got people like Rajah Caruth, I think is how you say his name, in the Truck Series, winning that. You have people like Haley Deegan moving up into the Xfinity Series, and you just have some younger drivers, plus you have drivers who are kids of former Cup drivers that are in and doing well. So I'm hoping that from the lower ranks, we're getting more enthusiasm and feeding into the Cup Series. But I just think there's a lot of excitement right now for the product, and especially for the Cup Series.
And for those of us that have been watching this sport for a very long time, it's not what it was 20 years ago. We're not selling out 150,000 seats every single week, and you're not pulling in 12 million viewers for your average race at Dover or something like that. But I think the sport's in a good place, and again, very encouraged to see these numbers going up like we did this past weekend.
I agree. And then if you can keep having goofy things happening, like, William Byron getting the huge garbage bag on his grill and then a beer can in the air filter. I mean, that's just fun fodder, if nothing else,
Hey, that's how you go viral, right?
Him. Exactly, Take one for the team. Thanks, William.
Absolutely. So, again, coming up this Sunday, Phoenix, 3:30 on Fox. Race number 4 of the season, concluding the West Coast swing. Then we'll continue on into returning to Bristol the following weekend, finally getting back on the concrete after spending a couple of years on the dirt there. So we'll be back to recap all that coming up next week. Appreciate it as always, Jen.
Hey, no problem. Thanks.
Absolutely. Jen Jensen from the early game on another exciting weekend of NASCAR racing. We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of The Extra Point. Get you set for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head with you on this Wednesday morning. A couple minutes away from the SEC Women's Basketball Tournament getting started. Georgia and Kentucky tipping off at 11 o'clock. Of course, again, South Carolina waiting for the winner of A&M and Mississippi State tomorrow, and they'll take them on Friday as they do have the double bye out there. So a lot of important basketball happening over the next couple days as it pertains to the Gamecocks. Of course, tonight's game between the men and Tennessee coming up at 7 o'clock. Premium coverage at 6:30 right here on The Game. Reminder once again, you can go to 1075thegame.com and register for your chance to win the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Every baseball game, $25 gets added to the pot. And when the Gamecock hitter hits a grand slam, you could win the cash prize of however much is in the pot at that point in time. Again, go to 1075thegame.com each and every week to register for your chance to win. I want to follow up on something that we talked about a little bit yesterday, that being the Arch Manning situation, where news reports coming out 2 days ago about him deciding to opt out of the new EA Sports college football video game that's coming out later on this summer. By all indications, at least as far as high-profile guys, he is the only one that has opted out to this point. The other day, they had reported that over 10,000 of the FPS athletes that were able to be in the game had decided to opt in, which again gives them $600 and a free copy of the game. A follow-up report on Arch Manning came out yesterday via ESPN, claiming that he is wanting to wait until he is the guy at Texas before opting into the EA Sports college football video game. Because his original reason for not wanting to be in is he didn't want it to be a distraction from football. He just wanted to focus on ball, which, again, the point that I brought up yesterday, I imagine this process probably takes all of 5 minutes to sign into this app, put in a little bit of personal information, and probably take a picture of your face so they can scan it and have a real-life model of you in the game. This layer of it is interesting, though, because it's implying that he feels like he's not justified to be in the game if he's not the starting quarterback as of yet, which I guess if that's your motivation or fuel to say, hey, I'm not at this level I want to be at, I don't want people to play me in a video game. I do think maybe that's taking a little bit too much of a deep and philosophical approach to this, because at the end of the day, this is just a game that people are going to play for fun. I don't think anybody's going to assign deeper meaning into it that, oh, well, he's in the game as a backup, that must mean this, and that about him. I think people are going to look at you more negatively for not being in the game overall. Which again goes back to the original point of what he allegedly was opting out the game for, to focus on football. It created more of a big story by you not opting in than you opting in. Because if you opt in, you're just with the 95% of other people and nobody's talking about you. But the fact that you decided to be the one, at least the first one of the big names in college football that says, yeah, I'm not going to do this. Well, guess what? People are going to talk about you. And you're going to get asked those questions. And I don't know what the media availability for sophomore or at least redshirt freshman quarterbacks at Texas is as far as their spring practices go, but I guarantee you he's going to get asked at least a handful of questions whenever he eventually talks to the media about this video game thing, which again is taking away from what your original goal was, to focus on football. So I don't know. And look, he comes from a well-off family in the Mannings where $600 to him doesn't mean a whole lot to him like it does to you and me. So we may not be able to understand the mindset of where he's coming from in regards to the money aspect of it. And, I'm sure he's not going to have trouble getting his hands on the game if he does decide to want to play it. But if he wants to focus on football, then probably not. He wouldn't be playing the game anyway at the end of the day. So it's an interesting thing. And really, again, based on the numbers that we've seen, just about everybody else has opted into the game. And we've seen some pretty high-profile guys that have decided to take on this ambassador role at EA Sports as well, and that was the big question, like the Brander Group that was trying to launch the lawsuit against EA Sports, saying, well, not all players are valued at this much money and some deserve more. EA Sports took that into consideration and said, okay, well, everybody gets the baseline $600 and the free game for being in the game. And then some of the high-profile guys that might be, potential Americans being in the mix for Heisman trophies, all that kind of stuff, are going to have the opportunity to kind of serve as ambassadors and be in commercials for the game, maybe have a shot at being on the cover, whatever it may be. So that kind of alleviates that other option of saying, hey, well, some guys deserve more. And again, EA Sports saying, yeah, we understand that, and we're going to give those guys opportunity to do a little bit more with the game than what the average, average player is going to be able to do. Which, again, at the end of the day, the fact that they're able to get real-life counterparts into this game and actually have these guys represented is fantastic from a quality of game standpoint, because as somebody that's played just about every single NCAA football game up to this point, the days of having quarterback number 7 and wide receiver number 2 and all that kind of stuff, you knew who it was, but it still wasn't complete unless you went in there and named the roster yourself or downloaded one off the internet. So to have a legit, full roster in the game is going to be cool. And for these guys to get paid to do it as well, how big is that for the backup left tackle or the punter at, Akron or something like that, to be able to get $600 and get to see themselves in a video game? Very, very cool. And again, Arch Manning just seems like one of the very few that is going to ultimately decide to opt out, at least for this year's game. I don't know, but maybe if he's the guy next year, if he's a starter for next year, then maybe he will. Maybe he'll decide to opt in then if he sees he is fit enough to do so. That'll do it for today's edition of The Extra Point. Coming up next, of course, is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. We'll dive right back in to the basketball conversation, getting you set for tonight's matchup between the Gamecocks and the Volunteers of Colonial Life Arena. Grant Ramey from VolQuest going to be joining us right at the top of the hour to kick off the show, giving a little bit more insight on what's going on with this Tennessee Volunteer basketball program. It's all coming up next on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on the Game.